Okay, we should be good. We are live on YouTube, so we can go ahead and get started. I sent you guys an agenda. I think it was Friday. It's hard to remember. Regarding a couple things, some big things that we wanted to touch base on. I'm gonna pull it up here. Oops.
Are you gonna share it, Christy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of weird to see everybody's whole face.
Okay. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
Okay. So, number one, the levy renewal for this November. And second on the list would be OFCC. We've recently had some changes and heard some good news for them. Then I kind of wanted to briefly go over how COVID has affected us financially in regards to different things. I know we talked, when we last talked in May, you know, we had known about some of the cuts and things, but not necessarily everything that has transpired since then. So I wanted to go over that and then kind of where we were at as of the end of September, or where we currently stand and where we're at and what we know. One thing that's not on here, but I would like to get meeting dates scheduled for the rest of the year. So that way everybody just has them. So we can do that at the end. But right now I'm looking at like middle of the month, November, February, and May. So, and then if we have to add other ones in because something comes up, then we can do that as well. But I wanted to make sure these ones at least were on the books, but we can do that when we get to the end. So, excuse me. So levy renewal. So as you know, we have the levy renewal on in November, which is like only 3 weeks away now, which is crazy. It is a 7.9 mil levy that brings in about $5.7 million annually. This will be, and I think we've talked about this briefly before, but this is our last chance to renew this levy to maintain our continuous collections. So if this were not to pass, we would immediately see that results starting in January, because we would not receive the money, you know, that half of our taxes that we would normally get in around February, March. That 5.7 million, that 7.9 levy would no longer be on the books. So that's very important. The second important thing then is that at that point, we would still have to go back and put something else on. And at that point, it would be new money. And that makes it a little different compared to the one we're trying to renew. So the one that we're trying to renew was previously passed prior to 2013. And then things changed as far as your 2.5% owner occupied credit and your 10% rollback. So anything prior to 2013, the state picks up those amounts and they pay us those rollback, that 12.5%. In 2013, going forward, they decided that any new money passed, so it wouldn't affect anything already passed that would be getting renewed in the future, as long as it was continually renewed. But if you are passing new money, that 12.5% then falls on the taxpayer. So now it's up, so it would be 12.5% more to that taxpayer than it currently is as it stands as the renewal. So that is a big factor that needs to be communicated big time, because that will be a definite change to the bottom line of what you are actually paying in taxes, and it could be on a very similar type levy. But if it's not passed in November, that's where we will be at. You want to add anything to that, Todd?
Nope, that's pretty much it.
So do you guys have any questions or anything that you're hearing maybe that we could help provide more detail on, or some answers to questions and things?
Christy, did you say that if we are not successful this time, we will lose $5.7 million automatic?
Yes.
Because the collection
Yep,
collection on anything new wouldn't start until next January.
yeah. You guys don't have anything?
Chrissy, on average, what is that? You know how they always say per $100,000 house that costs about what amount of money? I know we're paying it now.
What is that now?
I have
I
the
gotta-
number. I have the number. See, it's currently the effective rate is currently 7.25 mils, and therefore on a $100,000 property, people with the rollback right now are paying about $222 annually.
Okay.
And so by comparison, without that rollback, if the board were to bring back 7.25, it would be 250 something thousand dollars. But like I said, I mean, it would be an immediate reduction of 5.7 million, which is almost 10% of our general fund budget.
Okay.
Yeah, so we would skip all of the tax year 2020, collection year 2021. Because this 5-year period, we're at the end of the 5 years in this, we were at the end of the 5 years tax year 2019. So this is our last collection year right now. So we've already received all the collections for that. Going forward, if it weren't to be renewed, we wouldn't have anything next year, and we wouldn't have anything until we passed something else.
Yeah, and I hear people in the community saying, well, this is an opportunity in this day and age, going through COVID, the opportunity to save $200 or whatever, $222 per 100,000. And that is true. But they also need to understand the flip side of the loss of $5.7 million for the district and what that would mean, loss of 10% of the general fund revenue and what that would mean for the district.
It seems to me the justification, at least right now, has to do with like the amount of money that's been spent to offset expenses related to COVID-19. But because like we collect this money annually, as pertains to our conversation about sort of like communicating effectively these kinds of things, it might be good to talk about how in a non-COVID-19 year, this might affect the district like in kind of a practical way. I don't really know what that looks like, but
Yeah, I mean, that result is somewhere, if you look at it over the course of the 5-year forecast in totality, somewhere between 25 to $30 million that we would be. And I know there's a lot going on, and with COVID, there's a lot of things, but we'll get to more details on that later. But we've been cut a lot there too, as far as state funding and some other sources that we usually rely on. Open enrollment is going to be one that we will have that will affect us. And a lot of that money we've been given to, try to help make us whole or help with that added expenses is restrictive. It may not be as restrictive as some of the funds we've received in the past, but they are still restrictive to not just be able to put it, it's not general fund money. That's what the issue is. We're losing money in the general fund with these cuts, but this money coming in does not belong to the general fund. It is all federal grant dollars, similar to our other grants that we receive.
Right.
And it's a limited, it's a one-time shot right now, what we've gotten. So that's
So what's the district look like if this doesn't pass? Are we looking at, cutting staff, or what are we looking at?
we would definitely have to put new money on.
Okay.
As far as staffing, Todd, I'll let you. I mean, it's.
When you look at our staff and you look at 75 to 80% of our expenditures are staff related, personnel related, and you cut 10% of your revenues, absolutely, we have to cut staff. Where am I going to cut staff after I've cut in 2017 and 2019? Good question, Mike. I don't know, but we wouldn't have a choice. um, especially for at least a year, or suck it up for just a year. And then I don't know how you suck it up and when you're talking about a forecast that Christy was just describing and the cumulative impact. So at the end of the day, yeah, we would have to um, we'd have to cut staff. We'd have to take a look at that emergency levy and halt anything that we're doing with regard to the emergency levy. There would have to be a lot of changes that have to be made. I mean,
Okay,
sad but true.
okay.
Anything else regarding the levy? Anything? Okay, do we have a date for the next levy committee? Todd, I don't know, do you have a date?
I thought so. Give me a moment. I'll look it
Okay.
up from Tim. Tim
Okay.
Belby is our levy committee chair. All right, we can move on to the next. I'll keep looking for it.
Okay. I was kind of gonna let you take the lead on the next since you've had.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, right. Okay, so it'll be a little bit redundant for you, Alex, but for the rest of the team, we learned Tuesday, and you, Christy, of course, we learned Tuesday that we have been approved to transition to the expedited local partnership program away from the classroom facilities assistance program, which in a nutshell means that we can access the $80 million that's the local share immediately and start moving down the road of selection of architects, selection of construction management team at risk, begin the design process and so on and so forth. We begin the financing process, which includes a credit rating, sale of bonds, so on and so forth. So in terms of the immediate timelines for an architect, the first thing that we have to do is advertise twice. And we're planning to advertise tomorrow, October 13th, and Tuesday, October 20th, with statements of qualifications then due on the 28th of October. The district typically has a few representatives rank the statements of qualification, and that would include me and Christy and there are two paths from there. We can make a recommendation to the board, which is, I think, what we're planning to do. Just make a recommendation to the board to enter into negotiations with the highest ranked firm and skip the whole interview process because it is not required by the Ohio Revised Code. And so our goal would then be on the November 4th ballot, or November 4th board agenda, to select an architect of record. From that point, the architect of record then helps us with construction manager at risk. And the process is a little more involved because it isn't entirely qualifications based. It's a best value process where price and qualifications both weigh into the selection. And we would suggest weighting it 60-40, where qualifications is 60%, price is 40%. That gives heavier weight, obviously, to the qualifications of the firm, but still keeps price as a significant component. The timelines associated therewith would be to advertise for qualifications on October 26th, receive qualifications 30 days later, November 25th, shortlist to 3 firms on Monday or Tuesday after Thanksgiving, issue requests for proposals to shortlisted firms on Wednesday, December 2nd, pre-proposal meeting Wednesday, December 9. That gives them the firms a chance to ask any questions regarding the RFPs. Proposals then would be due Friday, December 11th. conduct interviews on Monday, December 14th or Tuesday, December 15th, and put a resolution on the board agenda December 16th for selection of a construction management team at risk. And that schedule would then put us into a place where the administrative work is off the table or out of the way, and we could have a kickoff meeting just after the new year, maybe the second week of January. So that's what we're planning to do there. I sent then a message to Christy, Kent Cashel with RBC, Rick Manloff, who's our bond counsel, and Mike Sudzina. And that team, Christy and I have to select a date for probably next week or the week after to get that group together and put together a similar financial timeline. And that, like I said, would include establishing a credit rating and then starting to go down the road of sale of bonds and so on and so forth. It would be at that point in time that we would lock in interest rates on sale of bonds and that kind of thing, which we anticipate that we will be lower than what we advertised during the levy process, which will ultimately save our taxpayers some money. So that's where we are with this process. Once we got the word Tuesday, we kind of stomped on the accelerator and want to get it going. Questions with regard to OFCC?
I would assume the levy renewal would be pertinent to the credit rating process.
Absolutely. You know, as you know, credit rating is based upon our cash position. And so what we've done over the last several years with 2017 emergency levy and then doing a combination levy has significantly improved the district's cash position, which will help our credit rating, and it'll drive down interest rates. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, right?
Right. So one question, we passed the levy to build the new schools and we started collecting money on that. Does that money get set aside, or is that part of what I'm looking at in this statement, this balance sheet statement I'm looking at?
No, that money is required to be set aside. So there was the 4 mills that were operating. There was the bond issue, the 5.33, and then the $500,000 that OFCC requires you have for permanent improvement, replacement of things in the future. So right now we received the collections on the bond retirement, but it goes into it sits in its own separate fund that can only be used, in fact, when we have the sale and then we have to make the payments on them. So it's there, but we can't do anything with it. It is not included. It's not part of the general fund. It's not part of any of that.
Okay.
It is, if you're looking at like the monthly statements, it is, because that encompasses everything. That is not just exclusive to the general fund. That encompasses all of our grants, all of our student activities, all of our, if we have scholarships, our Rotary services, our fees, that's all in there. But it is different. It is not just exclusive of the general fund, but we cannot do anything with it. Same thing with the $500,000 permanent improvement. It sits in its own fund, and that's really for the future when there's items that may need addressed in the new building. We will have that there to kind of take care of those maintenance items when necessary in the future. So that's where it's at right now. The 4 mills that we pass operating, that is part of the general fund, but that's it. That's the only money we really have access to at this current time.
Okay.
Anything else on the building project?
The next levy committee meeting is October 29th, 4:30 via Zoom.
Yeah, and those are all held Zoom. And I gave Tim your guys' email address just to kind of include you on those notices when there is one, if you wanted to in case you want to join or be a part of those meetings. So you'll probably get something from him when he sends out, you know, the notice regarding that it's the 29th and here's the Zoom link. So. Okay, so COVID-19, how have we been affected? It's probably shorter to list how we haven't been affected at this point, but back in May for the forecast, we knew we were receiving about the $940,000 cut in state funding. And that did happen. That happened in May and June of last year. They cut us that. It was restricted. In the forecast, we originally had, and that, I should back up, that is about 6% of our total state funding is what we lost. So we had projected for this year, the 2021 school year, at 10%. Right now, nothing is definite, but right now, they are anticipating it being the same cut it was last year. So about $940,000 for us again this year. Like I said, they have not come out and made that official. That is just what we've been hearing through the grapevine and in our different organizations and everything, that's kind of where they are. The economy has recovered a little better than they, you know, anticipated back in the spring. When we find something out about that, right now they've implemented that already. They implemented that from the get-go. They modeled exactly last year, so we are already receiving less than last year. Subject to change, of course, either way, depending on what happens. So right now, that's where we're at. We are receiving the same amount that we did last year. And I'll go through kind of like what cuts we've had to our revenue first. You know, a lot of the same things we talked about in the forecast are still, you know, happening. We don't have any theater rental money. We normally bring in about $100,000 a year. That's not currently happening. One thing that wasn't in there is the impact that it has to our students that we accept for open enrollment. So because of the, you know, 6-foot spacing and all the different guidelines in order to have smaller classroom sizes and be able to distance and be compliant with all the things that the health department wants us to be compliant with, we were not able to accept everybody returning. We don't have those numbers officially yet. They should be out. I think they said November 1st or 2nd payment that they give us in November. But we're looking at probably a loss of $770,000 with regards to that. Another thing that is still not current numbers yet that we're still working off last year as far as the state goes, on the flip side, is our open enrollment out. So what we have to give to other districts when students who are residents here open enroll into another district. We don't know how that will be affected. If it will be more, if it will be less because of the pandemic. And the same thing goes for the community schools. A lot of the online schools, I don't know if people may have just said, we're going to do that now instead of going the traditional school or the remote learning through the public school. So we'll get those updated numbers sometime November, December for all of those. But that $770,000 is a significant loss of funds for us with that. I'm trying to think of other cuts at this point that we received that's revenue related. Those are the big ones for sure. We really haven't seen, I didn't really see any kind of effect to our collections, tax collections as far as delinquencies. That really wasn't impacted at all. So that was good. We kind of had it a little bit in the forecast being affected just a little bit, but being made up later. It didn't really happen. It stayed pretty much where it's been the last 3 to 5 years on average.
So Christy, a question regarding that real quick.
Yeah.
Is that what you hear about the forbearance? You know, a lot of folks are able to put their mortgage loans in forbearance. Does that include tax payments that they're allowed to put in forbearance?
I don't believe they are. If I remember,
Okay.
I looked in that. I don't believe they are. They're still required to make those payments to the county.
Okay.
And you know, we are in the year of a reappraisal in Summit County. So, you know, once that is all kind of settled out, that may have an impact, a little impact, but it could give us a little bit of a positive impact going forward.
But it's a triennial update, isn't it? Or is it a sexennial update? It's full-blown sexennial update.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So,
Where we were.
yeah, and we haven't seen any of those numbers out yet either. So once we do that, that could help us a little bit with our, you know, our inside millage does not have that cap. And isn't affected by House Bill 920. So now on the flip side, we've had to do a lot of different things expense wise. So I will say we received about 570,000 in CARES Act money back in the spring. That was the initial, here's your CARES Act money. Originally, and I don't know how closely you followed any of this, but most of that money was based on Title I allocation. So our low income student data. And there are different restrictions in Title I about how you can apply and who's available, you know, who can use the funds, what students you can, you know, allocate that to. So the federal government had wanted it to be, because we are responsible for giving a share to our non-public. So there are 4 non-publics in our district that we would be their, you know, intermediary for those funds. So back then they were set to get about 80,000 of our 570,000 because the federal government wanted it to be on total population. So not based on what Title I was normally based on student population. And they had told us if we wanted to base it on Title I, we could, but then we had to restrict our use of the funds to just Title I students or buildings, which is just our elementaries at this point. So we wouldn't have, you know, that's where we use them. So then they got, just last month, they vacated that rule, that it was an interim final rule. They vacated it and said, no, you can't do that. You have to go by the low income data, which for us is a big difference. Now they're only getting about 6,000. So that gave us about $74,000 back. So that was definitely a big win and that helped us. So, you know, we've used some of that money for plexiglass barriers, supplies, cleaning supplies. We've used it to supplement some of the things that we normally wouldn't get. For instance, one of them in the classroom would be art supplies. Kids can't really share the art supplies anymore. They each kind of have to have their own individual, which is not something that we've done because we were able to share it. So we've had to buy extra. So some of that was allocated to help with that. Chromebooks, everyone has a Chromebook. And we definitely spent a lot more. I think we spent close to $500,000 on Chromebook between our grants and part of our emergency levy plan, where it was in the emergency levy plan, so that everybody has one. And then working on the 2-to-1 ratio. Is it K2?
Yes.
K2.
Yes.
So they have
Yes.
one at home and one at school, and the younger kids don't have to carry them back and forth. And things come up every day as we've been, you know, doing things, and we've been taking it from there. So I'm trying to think, we probably spent about 330,000 of that initial CARES Act money. So we still have a decent chunk. Then shortly after that, we received, the governor's got, you know, he had gotten a portion of money and then distributed it to the schools. So we got a little over 200,000, and we use that strictly for Chromebooks, for our Chromebook purchases. So we spent the entire amount on Chromebooks. And then recently, actually at the last board meeting, we passed that resolution. Summit County, they also received money, and they have distributed some to the schools. So we're going to receive $433,000 from Summit County here, which is really nice. Again, it's the same, that money is the same as the federal CARES Act money, which requires it to be for technology, cleaning supplies, things that you wouldn't normally have in your course of your day, but now you do because of COVID. So we're looking at that and other things and coming up with a plan for that right now of what we need. Obviously, this is not ending anytime soon. We've bought masks with it. We've any number of things. So we have that money. That's really it. So in total, that would have been, we're close to about 1 million, about 1.2 million. But in the state money alone, we're going to lose almost 1.9. So it doesn't really, while it's helpful and we're appreciative, it doesn't really make up for the loss of revenue that we've really had to endure here over the last 6 months, and not knowing what it looks like going forward either. Because if we were to lose that $770,000 in open enrollment permanently, that's per year. So that would affect the forecast as well, big time, over the course of the 5 years, if that's what it's going to look like going forward. So that's where that stands. Another big piece of this is our food service budget. And when we get to the next bullet point, I'll kind of pull it up and show you. So Chef Bailey does a great job with his budget and is always very concerned about it. He always has a nice, healthy cash balance in there for everything. And he does a wonderful job. Well, since school has been closed, was closed in March, and then we just returned at the end of September, but on hybrid, there's virtually no revenue coming in for food service. When we would be reimbursed typically by the state $60,000, $70,000 a month in meals. So what happens, most of his budget is funded by money from the federal government, which previous to COVID would be any free and reduced students that are served a lunch. We enter that, we submit that request to the federal government for reimbursement for those meals for the lunch program. So that's where that comes in. And then any other sales or parents putting money on other kids' account would be the other portion that we receive. And I know there has been, I don't want to say confusion, but that there's more to the budget than just food is what I'm trying to say, is that some people think, well, if you're not selling the food, then you should be, you're not buying it. So what is it? There's still the cost of the workers and their benefits and their salaries, because they are still here doing stuff. When we were completely remote in the spring, they were here, they were making lunches for pickup. When we have pickups, they're here doing all of that. And so we're still paying their salary and benefits. The food service is completely separate fund. It's outside the general fund. It's kind of a standalone. So they're kind of responsible for themselves in that way, where it's no other department. They're responsible for their own stuff and for their own revenue outweighing their expenditures. That obviously has not happened this year. You'll see little to no revenue since the beginning of July and previous to that, but being this fiscal year this fiscal year starting in July, if it's $1,000, I think that's being generous probably at this point. And their cost of doing business a month is around somewhere between $60,000 and $75,000. So while we started the year, thankfully, we had a healthy carryover balance. We are now in the red because of this. What has been helpful in those periods of time was that they said, hey, listen, everybody that gets served a meal is now reimbursable. It doesn't just have to be the kids that qualify for free and reduced. Every person that is served a meal, regardless, every student, you can apply and be reimbursed for that by the federal government. And actually, I just read over the weekend, I think they extended that through the rest of the school year, through the end of June. So that they had previously extended it to December, and now I read they did it again. So it'll be through the end of the school year, which is helpful. But the problem is, and some of the confusion is, they don't just give us that money up front and say, here you go, here's all the money for this. We have to serve those lunches. So if a student is packing or isn't being served a school lunch, we can't submit them for reimbursement. There's nothing wrong with that, but it just isn't going to be that for every student we have, we're getting X amount per head per day. That's not how it works. And as you know, we're on hybrid. We don't have the number of students in a day that we typically would, in addition to the fact that we still do have our remote learning academy. Meals are available to all those students to pick up like once a week, and they'll pre-package everything and it's there for the week for you. And those all count the same as reimbursable meals like they would if they were being served in the school. So it's really important, and we really tried to push that it really does help us when students are eating lunch at school. And I know some people, I was just talking to some friends over the weekend that said, I feel weird about that. Like, typically we don't qualify for it. I feel like I'm, taking advantage of something. And I said, no, you'd really be helping your district at that point, because they have to serve the meal in order to get reimbursed for you. So don't feel like you're taking advantage or that, something else. I said, you're helping the school district get that money, get that revenue that so many food service budgets are lacking right now. So we've really tried to push that, because that will really help his budget at the end of the day. More meals served means more money, more revenue for us from the federal government. And it's free for all students. So nobody has to pay anything the rest of the year. So if we could take advantage of that, that would be great. We've tried to come up with some different ways, different out of the box kind of ideas to get that, get those out, get those to homes for kids that are in remote, different things like that. So if you do ever hear anyone saying anything like, oh, I feel bad, please encourage them that really helps the district when they're getting a lunch at school. Because we need to build that back up and come out of that hole right now, and try to build that cash balance back up. Because if not, the issue is at the end of the year that the general fund has to cover any negative balance that they do have. So that would affect the forecast in that way. Even though it's a separate fund, it can't be read at the end of the year. And if it is, that means money has to be transferred from the general fund to cover it. So that is very important. It's not as on the same level, but athletics is kind of the same way. They are also in their own fund that's outside the general fund. And like every school district, they make all their money in the fall at home football games. Those are anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000 to $20,000 nights in ticket sales. They have had none of that at this point, very, very little. And so that is going to affect them as well down the line, because there are no ticket sales in spring sports. Very, little obviously in winter, and not knowing what exactly may happen with winter sports or spring at this point, to be honest. that they will be affected. Typically, that football revenue helps carry them for the rest of their non-money making sports for the end of the year. So they have had to really look at what they've been purchasing and how they're going to handle that. So that's not on the same level, but it is definitely something that has affected us. So there's all these little like trickle down effects for us, where we've lost money and we've lost revenue. And while it may not all be to the general fund, it will be the general fund's problem if they're in trouble at the end of the year and at the end of the day. So I'm trying to think of what else we have had affected that I'm missing. I think those are the main big points.
One area that may be affected is transportation. You know, because we're such a small district that we don't get a payment per mileage, we get a payment per student. And because and they take those numbers in the first week of October, and obviously we haven't had as many students riding the bus. So that's another area that we could get hit. We are reviewing those numbers right now. Marjorie, our transportation supervisor, is supplying us with the transportation report that is submitted to the state for reimbursement. But I anticipate that because we're not a per mile district, we're per student district, and we have fewer students on the bus, that will be impacted somewhat there.
One thing I did miss, now that you said that and everything, we've had to add staff too. We have had to add staff to accompany the number of kids that can be in a classroom. We just did not have enough. And you know, we've got a third over here in remote learning. We've got these other 2/3 on hybrid. So we have had to add staff in different areas just due to sheer numbers in different grades or different areas.
Right.
So that is something that's an additional expense for us.
We told the community 18 to 22, and as a result of those section sizes, 18 to 22, we've hired 5 additional staff members. We are in a place where we're considering 3 additional staff members to help out our 4th and 5th grade remote learning academy numbers, and looking at an additional staff member, whether it be a long-term sub or what have you, for some kindergarten class sizes that are huge. And one of the things that happens in schools, particularly at kindergarten, is you just don't know how many are coming. And then they all show up at the door in the the week or the 2 weeks before school starts, and you scramble. So we're looking at those additions, and at the same time, trying to look at how can we get the kids back in school as much as possible, as quickly as possible, as safely as possible. And so we're considering really studying the options on bringing K5 students back 5 days a week starting November 2nd. That is still work in progress, and very much hit full steam after the board meeting last Wednesday, and had my team's been doing a lot of work in consideration and in preparation for that kind of a move. We'll have further discussion on it tomorrow in our college career readiness meeting. And there's a lot of logistics and a lot of moving parts that go along with making that kind of a switch. Similarly, we're looking at the feasibility of making a transition in our 6-12 environment to a hybrid setting, but where they're here all day. And the impact of that would then be passing time, teacher planning time, and lunch that we talked about earlier in terms of Christy. So all of those pieces, all of those parts are still moving. Let's just say it that way. And so we're looking at 3 additional staff members to help out our 4th and 5th grade remote learning academy numbers. And one of the things that happens in schools, particularly at kindergarten, is you just don't know how many are coming. And then they all show up at the door in the week or the 2 weeks before school starts, and you scramble. So we're looking at those additions, and trying to look at how can we get the kids back in school as much as possible, as quickly as possible, as safely as possible. And so we're considering really studying the options on bringing K5 students back 5 days a week starting November 2nd. they will all impact what we've been talking about here in terms of our finances in one way or another.
How about infection rates, Dr. Nichols? Are we experiencing any spikes or anything from the school?
So every week I have a meeting with Summit County superintendents along with Summit County Public Health. And whereas we expected community spread in the schools, the matter of the fact is that it just isn't happening. We're not seeing community spread in the schools, primarily because the schools are doing the things that they're supposed to be doing, you know, maintaining distancing, mandating masks, those kinds of things. As we come back, we're not going to be able to maintain 6 feet. I'm just going to tell you that straight up. I mean, our classrooms are 600 square foot in size. And so we'll have some transition from option 1 to option 2 and vice versa. But specifically in terms of infection rates, every school district is required to have a dashboard of sorts. And if you go to our website, you can see our dashboard. And we have just put up the first 2 cases, positive cases in the district, both of them occurring at Lincoln Elementary. And students are getting a letter today with regard to those cases. But that's 2 cases in the entire district. And frankly, they're related cases. So they happen outside of the school. Does that answer your question a little bit, maybe?
Absolutely does. Thank you.
Anything else or any questions regarding anything that we've talked about as it relates to COVID or anything? I don't want to belabor the point, but I just want to make sure that we hit all the main points here, big ticket items. There are obviously a bunch of little ticket items that happen every day that affect the big picture, but not as big as most of the stuff that we've mentioned.
On the food service thing, one thing that I've heard is just that given the COVID considerations, there are not easy ways for them to keep track of like dietary restrictions and things like that. And so some parents, my family included, have, you know, particular diets. And so as much as I would like to give the district that money by having my kids get the meal, you know, one of my daughters isn't prepared to be able to differentiate between like meat, which our family doesn't eat, and like stuff that isn't meat. So we really can't send her in, and we can't have the teachers be responsible for that. And our kids are in kindergarten, so we don't have the experience, but my understanding is that prior to this, there would have been like a little screen that would pop up that would tell somebody what their dietary restrictions were, and they would make sure that student would only get certain things. But because of COVID-19, they're not doing that. And so in our family's case, and I've heard this from other people too, we don't really want to like do while they're in the buildings, have them take advantage of the free lunch because we can't be sure our kid's going to get the right thing. So I don't know if there's a way to address that, particularly as we go back in potentially 5 days a week. And I know that's not necessarily the finance committee's responsibility right this minute, but I wanted to say that because it's, you know, what's happened here in my house anyway.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So I'll go on to kind of where we're at right now. And I'll start with the food service just to kind of show you what we talked about. We've kind of talked about this. I present these once a month at the board meeting. They're always up on board docs. All these documents are attached. And I am going to start, once they're approved by the board, I will send them to you guys each month. That way you have them to kind of take a look at. So here is our food service. And as you can see, as of the end of September, we had negative revenue. And you may be wondering why there's negative. When a student leaves or moves or graduates and they still have a balance in their account that's been prepaid, they can request that to be refunded because they're not going to use it anymore, obviously. So that is why you see the negatives, because typically those do happen. Those refunds happen over the summer as people realize, hey, I'm not gonna, I'm not returning to that school, but I still have money on I have balance on my food lunch account. So we process those refunds. So, but you can see the differences that, here, that's pretty typical for July. We don't have a lot going on. There's school's over, so we're not getting those reimbursement payments. And people aren't putting money on their students' lunch accounts in July. But once we start getting September and August, you can see that's typically, none of those are actually federal reimbursements. We don't typically start receiving those until October because they're in arrears. So once the month is over, for instance, September, then you submit that request in October for that reimbursement. So most of the August, September is strictly parent payments and anything else that might come through, but it's typically just parent payments. But you can see the difference between last year and this year. It's a lot. If we go down to expenditures, you can see, you see a difference here. And the reason you see a difference here, a larger difference here in 21 for July and August is because previously, up until this past summer, this past fiscal year, food service was not paid year round. So the 24 payments, what we typically do with all of our staff, but always the teachers, you take your salary for the entire year and then we divide it over the 24 payments a year. And that's how they're still paid during the summer, is that they're holding some back basically every pay in order to get paid consistently. Our food service staff did not always do that. They were paid, I think it was 20 pays a year. So they missed, the summer months. They did not get paid. So we didn't have that expense on our end though either. And so that's why you see in 20 and 19, it's 10,000, it's 8,000. And this is 75. Well, this would have been the first July that the staff had a stretched out pay. Whereas you can see if we come down to September, typically these are higher. Well, now it's lower because it's spread out more. It's not all happening in 20 pays, it's happening in the 24. So these numbers in October, they will continue to be lower than before, just due to that fact that it's now spread out. But you can see what the cost is. July is pretty much probably just strictly salaries and benefits. There aren't many other costs. There might be a few, but it's about $75,000. And then when we get to August and September and you start adding in the purchasing of the food that they are making and having for pickup and having in the buildings, you can see that addition on there. So typically July is a low revenue month, as you can see, strictly because we're not getting those federal reimbursements then. So this is always like this, but you can see how much it jumped. And partially that is due to the fact that, the employees were getting paid, but it's also due to the fact that there was a negative amount of revenue for July. And you can see the same thing as we've gone on. So these are not each month, I should say. This is kind of a cumulative. This is where we were at in total. Down here is where, I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong one. Down here is the cumulative. So this is actual cash. And you can see if we go down to June of 2020, we ended with $209,000, which was pretty good given the fact that we had 3 months of closures. We still had $200,000 after that, close to 210. But you can see starting in March how it went down, how that cash balance went down. We were at 275,000 in March. And while 209 is still a good balance, it definitely dropped. We definitely lost money then. You can see the year before we ended the year with 235. So then July comes and we've lost 75. So we were down to 133. Then we lost another 112. Now we're down to 20. Now we're in the negative at the end of September, $106,000. And you can see where we've been in years past, and that's a pretty large swing. Pretty large swing there.
Hey,
So-
Christy, can I make a small request?
Yeah,
You have, your cash 006, your results of operation 006. I'm sure that's second nature to you, but I had no idea that was food. Is there a way to put another
Yeah.
descriptor in
Yes.
there for us?
yes, I can. And
That'd
that
be awesome.
probably helpful, like in general, because I do attach these to board docs. It's probably helpful for just to change it in general. Thank you.
Well, if
Oh,
you,
thank you.
Christie, just a thought, if you use that appropriations page, where it has all of the funds listed,
Yeah,
we could just use that as a key. It might be helpful for Mike and Sean and others to realize how many funds there really are that are
Yeah.
associated with our revenues and expenditures.
and I'm not sure, I meant to send that. Now that I'm thinking of it, I'm not sure. Did I send you guys our appropriations? In
Don't
that
believe-
Okay, I will send that out to, I'll show you guys here at the end. But I will add that descriptor in here. I know that's, yes, in my head it is second nature. Another one here's our general fund. 001 is our general fund, which is what the forecast is comprised of. So revenues, as you can see, pretty spot on with years past. It's a little bit more this year because this would be our first fall collection of that 4 mil levy that was passed last year in conjunction with the bond. So this would have been our first fall collection. We received one in the spring, but the numbers in 21 here in the fall look a little bit different than 20 and 19, but to the positive in that aspect. If we scroll down here, and this is a typical, you can see the pattern here too. We start receiving advances, we receive our settlements, eventually we receive our property tax and rollback. And then you can see November's, that month was okay. But you can see over here, it really drops off. We're not receiving tax collections in these months. We're not receiving those big ticket revenues other than our state revenue in those months. And then we start back again in February with our spring settlements that we receive, and kind of the same scenario. You get down to June and you're not bringing in as much. And that's typical at the end of the fiscal calendar year once we've received all of our tax collections. Expenditures, those are a little more steady, of course, from month to month. You can see very close to what we've spent in years past. I almost think that this is almost exactly the same or pretty dang close to it, looking at that. So down here, our net result of that, we are revenues over expenditures in July of 5 million. Again, fairly typical in years past. 1.3 here, same, and then 737, which typically this is negative. And that just has to do with the timing sometimes of the payments from Summit County. Sometimes they start their advances in July, all of them in July, and then we have our settlement by August. Sometimes they don't give us the final payment, the settlement, until September. So it just kind of depends on what month they hit. And so that's the difference here, why you see like this one is a little bit down and then this one, but then this makes the swing back too.
Christie, can I chime in on something?
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of expenditures, Mike, you asked earlier what would happen with regard to the 5.7 piece. Well, those expenditures are pretty steady because they mostly represent payroll, right? Because we're 75 to 80% personnel. And so those expenditures remain steady there. And so when you see from FY19 to FY20, some lower numbers and reductions, that comes as a direct result of reductions in force in 2017 and 2019. So that's where you see some of that. Now, the reality is that we're in negotiations with all three of our bargaining units right now. So we know that we're going to see some impact there in terms of those negotiations. They've taken either zero on the base or freezes in the past, and so it's going to be very interesting as we progress through the final stages of negotiations. We are right now at the place where we're talking money and insurance. That's the toughest place, right? And we got all three bargaining units that we're dealing with. So I just wanted to, add on to Christie's great explanation here with regard to the expenditures, and just state that the reality is that that's mostly salary and benefits. It's most of our operations. Sorry, Christy.
No, you're fine. So if we come down here, here's kind of our net cash balance. So this would be like the bottom line of the forecast per se, but by month. We've obviously increased each month so far this year. And so right now we sit at about 19.5 million, which you can see is a nice healthy increase from even last year, fiscal 20, and fiscal 19. Will it stay that high? No, because as you see up here, when we start getting on those smaller revenue months, but we have the same steady expenditures, that will dip a little bit. Is it going to be this year's numbers? Probably not. It's not going to be that low, but it's not going to remain at this throughout the whole year. It's not going to just keep steadily increasing. We did end the year last year at 12.2 million, which was a little bit better than what I had forecasted in May. So that was good. I think I was like at 11.3, or I can't specifically remember off the top of my head, but it came in a little better. Actual numbers at year end, and then we've received our collections here, so we're at 19.5, which as we mentioned in the past, when we were talking about the bond, that definitely helps when it comes to getting our credit rating. That cash position helps us tremendously. So right now, it looks to be in a good place. Now, like I said, and like Todd said, we have negotiations, so these numbers are gonna change a little bit. They're gonna be a little bit higher than they were here. They have already, I will say that they have already received their step for the year. So if as far as salary schedules, there's a certain number of steps, and each year they progress to the next one. That is kind of an automatic because it was in the previous contract. So by law, we roll them over to the next year, to the next service step. And so those are factored in there. What's not factored in there is the base increase to the schedule. Sorry, to the schedule. So it will be impacted. It's kind of half impacted right now, I guess you could say. We've got some of it in there, but not. So if you recall, we had 2% base increase each year is what is in the forecast. That's not set in stone. That's just kind of a typical average of what they've received in the past that we use for forecasting purposes. But that is what is set aside technically and added to the forecast for any kind of negotiated raises. So that will definitely impact. And like we said, all these other things, if we start losing that open enrollment money, which we would start losing around November, December, that's going to affect some of this, where we haven't seen it yet, but but we're going to, because right now we're on last year's numbers. And so that's kind of how they do everything, is that they base, here's what you got last year. We assume you're going to get it again this year. Once we get all the updated numbers moving, we'll make our adjustments. Well, they have those slated for about November, December. So that could definitely impact that going forward.
So if K-5 go back full-time, will that help mitigate some of that loss on the open enrollment, or is that mostly high school stuff?
They've already declared. I mean, it won't, just coming back K-5 doesn't make any difference for us right now. They've already declared whether they're going to be here or not. We've already accepted them or not, depending on class and section sizes.
Gotcha. One other quick question for you, Doctor, is does the current predicament help or hinder your negotiating position with regard to renegotiating contracts? I mean, is there any sympathy for the COVID or? No.
I will tell you that it probably complicates things.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
The teachers union has requested a memorandum of understanding that is probably too inclusive, but that's still in discussion as well. And honestly, everybody is a little bit on edge right now. And so where you might have a typical negotiation when you're all in the same room at the same time, we're doing negotiations with a federal mediator via this kind of a format, and negotiating via this kind of format is just really, really difficult. So you go through stretches of dead time, and that just it's frustrating. The whole process is then frustrating. So what I would say to you in terms of the COVID impact would be more, I think it would be more emotional, social emotional impact than really the pure negotiation piece. Where I think that they're feeling at this point that they're probably owed something because they took a zero to get us, in a rollover and that kind of a thing when we were dealing with some financial issues in 19 and so on and so forth. And they're feeling like they're kind of owed something because they took a freeze in 11, 12, 12, 13. So that's kind of, that's kind of where we are. And people are, I think, as much impacted socially, emotionally as anything, pretty much on edge. Christy,
Okay.
what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree. It's just, I even for myself, I think it's the frustration of just even basically how we have to do it, and that this is not as conducive to negotiating as it would be if you were in person and, face to face with people and kind of having those conversations.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. On.
One of the things that I forgot is, what we've done over the last several years is we've taken this district from, a 6% cash carryover position where we didn't have any money. We didn't have anybody to negotiate with. And now we're at, the numbers that you see on the screen here, we're looking at 18, 19, 20% cash carryover. And so now we have some money. And and so
they want some of it.
Yeah, they want a piece of it.
Yeah.
And I think it's other part of the frustration is the things that we don't have the answers to. If a renewal levy doesn't pass, how much open enrollment are we losing? Is this actually going to be what the state reduces us by, or is it going to be more if something happens over the winter? And there are a lot of unknown factors, and then trying to negotiate something that's best for both parties is hard because I don't know. I don't have a lot of those answers financially to know where it might all land at the end of the day. And nobody does. So that's frustrating I know on my part personally that, one thing happens, and just like we saw in the spring, it's, all of a sudden you've lost this revenue or you've XYZ, and it's hard. It's hard to predict that and to be able to do something like forecast that kind of stuff out. So
It's a pretty fragile balance, huh?
yeah. It
I mean, you
definitely,
think about the community aspect of it too. I mean, let's say we settle at 3% and then all of a sudden we lose $5.7 million and, you know, and then, you know, the 5-year forecast changes dramatically. And then the community that doesn't understand school finance, they look at it and say, what the heck just happened? You know? And so that's the other side of it too. That it becomes hard, difficult.
that's-
Thanks.
The other one that, this is kind of the same picture you just looked at, that what we just had was a little more condensed. This is what's called SM2. This is off my system. And no, I don't happen to be that good that every estimate is spot on for the month, but I have OCD, so I go back in and make sure that there's all these little zeros over here because I can't deal with it. So you can see this is more of a breakdown by forecast line. So if you were looking at the forecast, you would see these same sections and line numbers 1.02. They all match up. So this is more of the breakdown of in what place did we receive these funds. And you can see, so this is the month of September. And then over here is kind of our fiscal year to date. So from July through the end of September, here's the accumulated balances of revenue of what we brought in totality. So we received our last settlement in September for real estate, which includes our tangible personal property tax, excuse me. This is our state money right here, 1.2. This is also state money, the restricted grants and aid, but those are our funds for economic disadvantage and career and technical education. So those are required. They can only be used for those things. So they are separated out. And then basically all of their operating revenue is everything else that's not listed above that's basically tax related or state. But that does include, that section includes our open enrollment numbers. So that could, you can see a difference there. But you can see for the year here, we are at about 21.8. If you come down here, these are kind of not your typical revenues. So like all other financing sources would be perhaps if we received a refund, and that's what this is this year. This number right here for this month. Another example, that is actually the retirement system. So we have to kind of project with both the state teachers retirement system and the school employees retirement system, you know, what our payroll is going to be for the year. And then they take that and they come up with like a monthly estimate that we pay based on our salary estimate. And then they true it up at the end of each year. So in this true up, they owed us money after our actual numbers came in, which is not surprising given that we had a salary estimate, which includes not just their regular contracted, but any overtime or substitutes or anything like that. When we did the estimate, we did it with a full normal school year in mind. And we know that's not how the last 3 months ended, where we didn't have substitutes. We did not have as much overtime as we typically had. So they ended up owing us some money back. Another big one that we get, and got word that we will get again this year, is the Bureau of Workers' Compensation. They do that $1 billion payback thing. And they've done it for the last, it's been a long time now. They are required, they can't have so much excess, you know, in their funds. So what they do is they give refunds back to us. And so we should be seeing that soon. They just put that out in the last couple weeks that they're doing it again this year. And so then this is the bottom line here for the month and for the year. And then down here, your expenditures broken down, salaries, benefits, or purchase services, supplies, capital outlay. Capital outlay, a lot of, we've said in the past, emergency levy is a lot of that money. That in particular in September was a partial payment, or almost a full payment, I should say, for our roofs. So we did Schnee, Price, Preston, and Richardson. Is that right? So we did repairs to all of those and this year as part of the emergency levy fund. So that all happened over the summer. And these are that category for this month. It happens to be a large payment to finish that off. And then your other objects down here. So in total, 5.1, got 14.7 in total expenditures for the year. Nothing down here. Typically our, advances. This operating transfers out is where you would see any kind of transfers to cover a food service balance or athletic or anything that's in the red. So that's where that would show up. But you can see it shows you, here's what your excess was for the month. Here's what it's been for the year. And here's where we started at the beginning of September, cash balance. Here's where we ended. And outstanding encumbrances are all of our open purchase orders. So a lot of them for things like utilities and all of that, we put on for the year in the beginning of the year. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to spend that entire 3.4, but that 3.4 has been obligated in a sense if we needed it. So there are some things out there that are open for the year that we have not paid on yet. So we have a lot of year-long contracts for special ed and food service and things like that go on in the beginning of the year. So that number will dwindle as time goes on. We get closer to the end of the year and we're making all those payments on those final payments on those. So it's pretty similar to the other one, but a little bit more of a breakdown. And then this one is just inclusive of everything, which let me, yep. Somebody say something. Okay, let me pull up the appropriation so I can show you, and then I'll send them to you. Okay. Can you see that now? The appropriation. So this is our appropriation resolution. This is passed by the board. You can see it says October 7th. That was the last time we passed what's an amendment basically to the appropriations. Anytime there's a change or an increase in any of these things, it has to go back through the board in order for us to legally be able to expend it. So what you see on here is this is basically what we're saying we're going to spend. These are the expenses side. So that doesn't necessarily mean that this is all the revenue we're bringing in. We could be bringing in more, but this is all we're anticipating spending out of these funds. So you see your general fund, and that is our, what is the 5-year forecast is compromised. This column here is anything that was maybe a purchase order open last year that is carried over to this year. So maybe the payments crossed years, or we paid part of it, we're going to pay the rest of it in fiscal 21. So that's what you see here. Going down, this is the bond retirement. This is where the bond money is any expenditure. So that's not what we've brought in. But right now, the only payments that I am making on those, which are technically charges, is that the county assesses us fees for doing tax collections. So we have all their fees that are involved. So each settlement, I have to pay those basically to the, I have to account for those as expenditures to the county, even though they just give us the net of everything. We have to do that. And permanent improvement, that is money that's been there. Some of it, I think, got transferred, if I remember correctly, from the last bond. There's like 20,000 left, so moved to permanent improvement. Food service, special trusts are really scholarships and scholarship trusts that people have set up. 009s are your school fees. This will be one that is where some of the money from the building project will go. Right now, obviously, there's nothing because we have no idea. We had no idea until last week, but that is where you will see some of the money. Rotary, that is compromise of some of our career tech programs that provide services to outside. So our cosmetology, when they are, they kind of operate and people from the public can come in. Let's see, Rotary, I think that was what was that? We've transferred, we are closing that account out. So they had some things in Rotary that really probably should have been in the general fund. So this is kind of the closing out of that, and then we shouldn't really see that anymore. 018, that would be your principals accounts, things like that. So when they receive donations, or when they get like, I'm sure you've seen like in Target or Acme or those kinds of, turn in your receipts, or you can attach your school name to this. That's where that comes in. The 19s are our local grants. So when teachers submit things to GAR or other local agencies that give grants, that's where that goes. 022 is if we host any athletic tournaments, it's required to go in a separate fund. 026 used to be where we did our insurance out of, but now that has also been transferred to the general fund, so there's just a little left over. You can see our 034, this is where that $500,000 permanent improvement will reside. This is same as above, the expenditures for the tax collection. Our student activities, those are all of our NHS and academic club and all academic challenge and all of those things. 300 is mostly athletics. We are also the fiscal agent for those 4 non-publics. They receive money from the state. It's called auxiliary funds. So we are their fiscal agent, and this is where all that goes for them. And the rest of these are common from 400s to 500s, all of our state and federal grants that we receive. You can see down here, here's our CARES Act, which includes both the Summit County money and the money that we receive directly. This is the one that the governor gave us, along with a broadband connectivity grant that helps us if people don't have access to hotspots or things like that in order to remote learn or distance learn. We have that. And then the rest of them are typical federal grants for different purposes, our special ed, our Title I, et cetera. So that's all that is, as you can see, which is a larger number than just our general fund. So we do have all of these other funds that all have their own little requirements with them. So I will send you guys that. But that's what this is inclusive of, is everything you saw on that list. So it's just kind of the bigger overall picture as far as actual cash that we have. when everything is put together. So you can see these numbers are similar, but a little bit higher because they're inclusive of everything. And if you come down and you look at that, general fund's 19 million, but in total, with the rest of those funds, we're at about 24.6 at the end of September, which is it's about 9 million more than the years past. So, and a lot of that this year is due to those CARES Act funds, things that we don't typically receive, that we're now receiving this year, to make up for some of that lost funding. So that's really all I have. That's it, just a little bit. November is the forecast. So I have to do a forecast in November. I'm going to send out, like I said, I'm looking at those three, November, February, and May. I'm going to send out an email and just kind of make sure the dates I have are okay with everybody. And I don't know if this time works best or not for some of you. So I'll throw that in there too. If 11:30 works, I think I know, at least for myself and for Dr. Nichols, in the morning is better. But I don't really know what time. I'm looking at Thursdays. So I don't know if that's the same for you on Thursdays or not, Ted.
Fine with me. And like you said, for me, 8 o'clock is better, but I'm amenable to whatever's best for the group. We'll just have to move some other things around.
Okay. All right. Any final follow-up questions or comments or good of the order?
Pretty good.
All right. I will send that appropriations and I will send the dates and see if everybody can make those work. So the next one in November, though, I'll be going over the forecast. It'll be the Thursday before the board meeting, more than likely, I think is the date I have, and then let you guys kind of preview what I'll be presenting to the board that following Wednesday. Excuse me. So, all right. Sounds good. All right.
Thank you, Christy.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Mike.
Bye, guys.
You too, Todd. You guys take care. Good luck.